morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what part of the day you're watching this episode of Data-Driven Formula One. My name is Patrick Henz, and today we want to speak about the last season of the decade, at least if you consider the decade starting with 1980 and ending with 1989. So we're speaking about the 1989 Formula One season. As always, we discuss shortly the races, the technology, the drivers, and what was interesting about this year. So welcome to Data-Driven Formula One 89. What happened in the winter break between 88 and 89? In 1987, so we go some years back, the former Italian racing driver Lamberto Leoni, who had been active, for example, for Surtees and the Ensing team, founded his Formula 3000 team, First Racing. Being there, next step was to entering Formula One. For this, he asked Richard De Villa, who, for example, designed the car for Fittipaldi Racing, the FD01, for a car with the aim to enter the 89 season. The car complied with the diverse FIA regulations, including the crash test. Problem, the car was overweight, meaning not competitive. Due to this, Leone decided not to start in 89, but asked for a second chassis. This chassis, the second car, would be acquired later by Ernesto Vita for his team called Live and used for the 1990 season. So First Racing team, one of the various teams. We discussed some in the past which planned to enter Formula One, but for whatever reason did not make it. So we never saw First Racing in Formula One, even if they had Formula One chassis, even if they already had a driver for 89, Gabriele Tacchini, who would later join other smaller Italian teams, but had higher success after this more in the touring car sports. Even if they never managed to enter Formula One, they stayed in Formula 3000, which was a quite interesting series in the 80s, 90s until 1991. We stay a little bit with Italy. Chrysler acquired the Lamborghini, and I'm not speaking here only about Formula One, but the whole companies. Chrysler acquired Lamborghini in 87 to include an Italian sports car manufacturer in its portfolio, something which tried earlier Ford with trying to acquire Ferrari, which did not work out, but then later had a special contract with De Tomaso to distribute the De Tomaso sports cars via the Ford dealerships in the US. So something similar was Chrysler planning. And at the end of the 80s, we have to consider in the mid-end 80s, we had the time for the big super sports car. We had the Porsche 959, the Ferrari F40, and the Lamborghini Diablo. So sports cars which have been which you could buy if you had enough money, drive on streets, which for the first time could reach 300 kilometers per hour and more. So we had this this focus this time when everybody was mad about the super sports cars in general, big hype, and Chrysler wanted to be a part of it. With the acquisition, the company had also the goal to enter Formula One. So in 89, they supplied a V12 engine for the first time to a Formula One team here to Lola. This also not in 89, the first year when the turbo engines had been banned again. And so all Formula One teams had to switch back to normal aspired engines. Interesting to mention Ferruccio Lamborghini, born 1916 and died in 93, had a clear company strategy to stay out of racing. This mainly to prevent that his son would feel attracted by this dangerous sport. So for this personal reason, we never saw before Lamborghini in sports, not in the endurance races, sports car races, nor of course in Formula One until now. And even if he was still alive, he wasn't leading the Lamborghini company anymore. So now Chrysler could take the decision, yes, we want to participate in motorsports, and yes, we want to participate in Formula One. With this words, let's dive into the season, and we're starting as before in Brazil, South America, Jacaparanga. It was the last race in Rio de Janeiro. Interesting, of course, the big star of the country, Ayrton Senna, was from Sao Paulo, so somehow also logical to focus on Sao Paulo in the next years. It was the first victory for a car featuring a semi-automatic gearbox. Nigel Mansell with the Ferrari. The first team, which we already discussed, had to withdraw as the car failed the FIA preseason crash test, even though it later complied with the test, but then the car was overweight, so didn't make any sense for first to participate. Nicola Larini was disqualified for illegal starting, and this is something I lively remember from Formula One in the 80s. The starts in opposite today mostly never happened at the first time. Mostly they had to be stopped because somebody couldn't start the engine, had to raise the hand. The car got started externally, and all drivers had to go again on an introduction lap and then a second attempt to start. Also, we saw various times drivers starting too early, like in this case, unlucky Nicola Larini. And then again, the start had to be repeated, and the driver was unfortunately disqualified. Happened quite often in the 80s and also, if I'm correct, still in the 90s. Nigel Mansell, so again, became the first driver after Mario Andretti to win a Ferrari at his debut. After him, Alain Prost, second position, and Mauricio Gugelmin, another Brazilian, on the third position. Mauricio Gugelmin on the Leighton House Lola. Then let's come to Europe, San Marino, the Imola Grand Prix, even if the racetrack is inside Italy, as discussed before, as we had a lot of racing fans in Italy and various Italian racing teams. FIA wants to give two races to the local fans and one camouflage a little bit as the San Marino Grand Prix, the Grand Prix of the very small country located in Italy. So again, a marketing topic. First victory for the year for Ayrton Senna, then the other McLaren driver Alain Prost, and the local driver Alessandro Nannini on the Benetton. As you remember it, or maybe you know it from the Senna series on Netflix, Alain Prost declared that McLaren had a pre-race agreement that whoever led the first turn should stay there. But nevertheless, Ayrton Senna disrespected this rule and overtook Alain Prost. So the fight, which had been observed by everybody in that year, became public quite early in the season at the second race, and we would see this, of course, the whole year. From one small country to another, Monte Carlo, Also here, victory for Ayrton Senna, Alain Prost, and Stefano Modena. Due to an injury from the earlier Imola Grand Prix, Gerhard Berger could not participate, so that Ferrari only started with one car. He tried to start, but then they had to see wasn't possible and they could not switch to another driver, so only one Ferrari starting. Also, we saw the only Grand Prix start for the French driver Pierre-Henri Raphael on the Italian Coloni. It's a very small team which had big problems to qualify for the races, so that's why only start for Pierre-Henri Raphael, even though he tried various times the year to qualify. You may remember we had the Friday pre-qualification where only the best drivers would continue to the Saturday official qualification, where also not all could qualify even to start. So we had really a big hard selection, and for teams like Coloni, really difficult to get through due to limited budget, etc., etc. Also, as Brabham, who not started in '88, came back for the '89 season, and so a relatively big team, even though much smaller than in the '70s or early in the '80s, but on a higher professional level. So they practically always made it to through the pre-qualification and qualification into the race, and so difficult again for Coloni, Zakspeed, Real, Osella, and the other small teams to get qualified. And again, over the big sea, Mexico City, interesting Coloni, one of the mentioned small team. They focused on the C3 car as they didn't finish it before the start of the season, so they started with the C2. Due to regulations, they had to fly to Mexico City and at least have an attempt to qualify. So at the end, they brought the cars with them, but only 3 mechanics for the 2 cars. With this, they complied with the regulations, but honestly, it was not a serious try to qualify for the race. Victory again, Ayrton Senna, then Riccardo Patrese and Michele Alboreto. Then we go north, racing this time in Phoenix in the US, Phoenix, Arizona. Here you see another city course similar to Monaco. Victory, Alain Prost, Riccardo Patrese, and then third position, Eddie Cheever, the local driver. No surprise, we go further north, Canada, Montreal, Thierry Boutsen in the Benetton as the 2 McLarens struggled, then Riccardo Patrese and Andrea De Cesaris. Paul Ricard, France, local driver, Alain Prost, supported by local fans, victory for him before Ayrton Senna, and then third position, Michele Alboreto again with the Ferrari. Quite early in the season, but Alain Prost already announced here to leave the team, where it was quite obviously that he was not happy anymore. As he also mentioned to the press, he felt that Senna would be preferred. Maybe he had a point, maybe not directly by McLaren, but Senna had a very good relation with Soichiro Honda, so the Honda part of the team may have preferred Senna. It doesn't mean that he got better motors, but this was his perception, and again, he didn't feel that at home anymore at the McLaren Honda team. So he announced to leave, but not announced yet where to go to. So victory, Alain Prost, Ayrton Senna, Michele Alboreto, and we had a number of debuts at this race. First, a Frenchman, Jean Alesi, was replacing Michele Alboreto at the Tyrrell team because, Michele Alboreto was not starting for Ferrari, of course, but for his new team. So before this, Alboreto had been at Tyrrell and he had to leave because Alboreto was sponsored by McLaren and Tyrrell received a new tobacco sponsor, which had been incompatible with Marlboro, and so Alboreto had to leave the team. Another Frenchman, we had quite a number of French Formula One drivers also, as the system supporting young drivers in France in the 1980s had been quite successful. Eric Bana replaced Yannick Dalmas at Larousse because was temporary because of a sickness. Martin Donnelly replacing Derek Warwick at Arrows because Warwick had a karting accident. And Emanuele Pero replaced Johnny Herbert at Benetton due to an accident he had earlier. He still had problems. We continue in Europe, UK. This year, Silverstone, victory, Alain Prost, Nigel Mansell, Alessandro Nannini. In Germany, at the Hockenheimring, again, Senna, successful. Then Alain Prost to Nigel Mansell, Hungary. Nigel Mansell being the fastest, but then Ayrton Senna and Thierry Boutsen. So quite interesting if mostly if both McLarens reached the end. Ayrton Senna was the fastest, but many times, but if only one, but many times Senna, for example, did not finish the race for whatever reasons, not meaning always directly an accident, but as he drove the car more at the limit as Alain Prost that year, maybe he caused or triggered more technical problems than Alain Prost this year, which could be a reason for whom would win the championship. We will see. Spa-Francorchamps, of course, I know personally because besides being a Formula One track, this is had been part of the normal Belgium streets. So I had the pleasure to drive Spa with my normal car. Here again, what I've just mentioned, first position, Ayrton Senna, Alain Prost, and Nigel Mansell holding strong, even if the gap between Ferrari and the two McLarens had been extreme in the race. Is this one of the highlights of each year? Italy, Monza. Before the race, Alain Prost announced that next year he would drive for the Scuderia. Of course, made him then already in that race the favorite of the Tifosi, even though he still drove for McLaren. But as I said, Ferrari, even though it sometimes could reach the third position, even had some victories, they never had a competitive chance against the McLaren if they didn't have a technical problem. As a reaction, as Prost made his move, Williams announced that Riccardo Patrese would stay with them, and Lotus announced that they would receive Lamborghini 12-cylinder engines for the next year. The race itself, Alain Prost victory, Gerhard Berger second position, and Thierry Boutsen strong third position for the Belgium and the local Benetton team. Even Benetton Italian company, even though the team was located in UK. Then let's go to Estoril, Portugal. Victory for Gerhard Berger, Alain Prost second, third Stefan Johansson. Let's speak again about Nigel Mansell. He came too fast into the pits and missed the Ferrari pit. Against the signals by a Ferrari mechanic, he reversed for changing tires, reverse in the pits, deviation to FIA regulations. Accordingly, he got the black flag, which then he ignored, and this led to he ignored it, his disqualification. He stayed on the track, driving fast, trying to overtake Ayrton Senna. Both cars collided, both out of the race, and this led to a disqualification for the next race. But let's stay first with the results. Portugal, victory Gerhard Berger, Alain Prost, and third, Stefan Johansson. With this, just a small trip, Portugal to Spain, Jerez. Nigel Mansell, again mentioned, disqualified, and also here Ferrari did not start it with a second car. Victory, Ayrton Senna, second, Gerhard Berger, third, Alain Prost. Suzuka, and you may remember it, you may have seen it in the Senna series during the Japanese Grand Prix, as Prost initiated braking for a corner right in the beginning of the race. Senna made a daring move alongside. However, Prost, aware of Senna's attempts through his mirrors, swiftly maneuvered his car to obstruct Senna's path. Despite prior agreements to leave room, same what we discussed for the beginning of the season, here Prost opted to defend vigorously. Their refusal to yield resulted in a collision just before the turn's apex, causing both cars to skid to a stop at the partially obstructed chicane escape road. Prost couldn't continue, but Senna managed to restart his car. He overtook Alessandro Nannini and won despite the damage. Nevertheless, post-race, Senna was disqualified, which sparked a controversy over an alleged bias, because Jean-Marie Baleste, the FIA president at that time, supported the disqualification, and Senna concluded that he was biased because Balestre would have preferred the French driver, maybe not only related to nationality, but Prost called the professor was not only a very fast driver, but also knew the politics in the sport, so had a quite good relation to high-level people there, in opposite to Senna, who had a more rebellic attitude. So also beside this, only 11 car finished due to the high attrition in Suzuka. Thanks to this, Alessandro Nannini won the Grand Prix before Riccardo Patrese and Thierry Boutsen. Adelaide, due to wet conditions and a start collision, the race was finished only after 70 laps. Planned had been 81. Alain Prost abstained to participate at the restart after a big accident. He did so as he already knew that he would be the champion. He had enough points, no reason to continue under wet conditions, as we know, quite dangerous. And here you may align his decision to Niki Lauda, who also decided back in the 70s to not when Lauda started the race, but then went to the pit and ended the race for him because he personally decided too dangerous driving in the rain in Suzuka. It was the final race for the, at least in Formula One, for René Arnoux, Eddie Cheever, Piercarlo Cinzani, and Dr. Jonathan Palmer. Furthermore, it was the end for two small German teams, Zakspeed, which has the disastrous season with the new Yamaha engine, later more, and Real. Victory, Thierry Boutsen, Alessandro Nannini, so the Benettons really had been strong this season, especially at the end, and then Riccardo Patrese on the third position on the Williams. Technology, no surprise, Constructors' Championship, McLaren, Honda, 199 points. Then Williams, Renault, big gaps, 77 points, then Ferrari 59 points. Benetton Ford, this is the manufacturing engine, the works engine, not the Cosworth as the other teams. Benetton Ford, fourth position, then Tyrrell, Lotus Jart, Aros Ford, Dallara Ford, Brabham Jart, Onyx Ford, Minardi Ford. Quite good result for the small teams from Onyx and Minardi. March Ford, Real Ford, Ligier Ford, AGS Ford, Lola Lamborghini, without any points, Osella Ford, Coloni Ford, Zakspeed, Yamara, and the Swiss Eurobrune with the jet engine. Let's have a look on the cars itself. From an aesthetic point, I really like this area. We have aerodynamics, very clear lines, which again, my personal taste, I really like the design of the cars end of 80s, beginning of 90s, especially if we have such classic liveries as the Marlboro at the McLaren. Interesting here, the car featured the new Honda V10 engine. As I said, turbo had been banned, so we see this car with a new engine. Nevertheless, it continued its dominance in the sport. The Tyrrell 018, as I mean, if you see the design of the car, you see that this was a team with a very limited budget. Design, half dark blue, half yellow, thanks to the camel sponsor. Yeah, quite an opposite to the whole design of a car like McLaren. Williams, the FW13, also here with the classic Williams design, at least classic from my point of view. Again, yellow, dark blue, white. Also here we see a new engine which was doing very good, the Renault V10. Interesting because Renault originally started the turbo engine area, pioneered it, introduced it, but successful. They became now second position with the V10 engine, normally aspired. Brabham, after staying away in 88, they returned. They had to start as a new team to do first the Friday pre-qualifications and then qualified, which they did quite good. They did regularly, especially with Stefano Modena. If you look at design, typical dark blue, white, even though they didn't had the sponsors like Olivetti or Parmalat, like before, the two sponsors, which as company had these colors, but they stayed with that colors even if they didn't had the same sponsors anymore. So typical Brabham colors. Besides this, you see lack of bigger main sponsor. Lotus 101, we saw the Tyrrell being half camel painted, the Lotus fully camel painted. So this was the number one team for this company as a sponsor. Very nice design, clear colors, very aesthetic. And I know I've mentioned it at the 88 season. Camel, for me, is not really much aligned with Formula One, as in the 1980s, I remember their advertising in the cinema always included some Indiana Jones character driving with the Land Rover inside a jungle, a desert, etc. So for me, Camel was more a Land Rover than a Formula One car. But anyway, they had been quite engaged in Formula One these years. March CG 891, Leighton House, the team was called. So the car, due to regulations, the car is a March, I think a March Judd, if I remember or March 4th. But and as Leighton House asked March to construct the engine for them, they couldn't call the car Leighton House GG 899, but it had to be called March CG 891. Same we would see later with other small teams. Benetton B189 with the Ford Works engine doing quite well. Also typical colors for end of 90s, end of 80s. Very colorful, mixed together, green, yellow, red, blue, the united colors of Benetton, as they also sold their, especially their sweaters, very successfully in the 80s, having all these very colorful designs. And here, as I've just mentioned, the other team, similar to Leighton House, the Scuderia Italia, they asked the Italian design company Dallara to design the car for them. And that's why it's called the BMS Dallara F189 instead of Scuderia Italia F189. Looks like a small Ferrari, but no relation here between them. So it was not the junior team as you would think because of the color of because of the similar similarities in name, both being called Scuderia, which is Italian for race team. Race team originally meant for horses, but then with the introduction of the automobile, it was also related to motorsports. Only later on, once they would receive a Ferrari engine, but as a customer, so they paid for it. So this is not the junior team of Ferrari, as as we know from today's motorsports, that all the big teams have like junior teams, some officially like Red Bull, like uh, and Racing Bull we had, um, but but in the 80s we had a lot of small teams, as also in the decades before, and something which I personally liked because here we saw Formula One drivers starting, then switching to other teams. And these have been very small teams, sometimes still like a garage team, like in the 60s, 70s. But with the professionalism of Formula One, we don't have this anymore. And today, 25, even if the teams at the bottom, they are professional organizations, so very far away from a garage company or small team like Dallara, Coloni, Zakspeed, etc. Very beautiful car, not that successful, but I mean, it looks good, especially in these colors. I mean, nearly the same kind of red as Ferrari. Not surprisingly, because this darker red is the typical Italian racing red. And with the white, of course, it reminded to the 1970s Formula One Ferrari, which supported Niki Lauda to become champion. And even had this year the 27, the famous number from Gilles Villeneuve. So really beautiful car. Minardi, quite a good year for them. You see, small team. Also they had a lot of mixed sponsors, mixed colors, yellow, black, white. But nevertheless, here the colors fit quite good together, in opposite to other teams. So they managed this quite successful. And so congratulations to Minardi. And here we see the Ferrari 640. Also here, great design, very simple, but not no, but very quite successful. Third position, big gap to Honda and McLaren. Nevertheless, they had been attractive for Nigel Mansell, and this would bring them step closer to winning a championship again. But more about this in the 1990 season. Lola LC89 reminds a little bit to Benetton. Looks like United colors again: blue, red, green, yellow. Doesn't look bad, honestly. Again, looks like the junior team of Benetton, but no, also here no relation, no relation. This is the Larousse team. They asked Lola to design their car. That's why not a Larousse LC89, but a Lola LC89. Coloni C3, the car they brought not at the beginning of the season, but later on. Also here, you see a lack of main sponsor, but besides this, the livery, I think it's quite okay. The design looks a little bit old-fashioned, conservative. Yeah, I mean, if you have limited budget, then you cannot expect more. Sometimes they could qualify, but often they struggled with this task. Last but not least, to show you today, and sorry, I have more. The Eurobrune ER 189. So here we have a small team from Switzerland. Brune had been successful in endurance races with the Porsche 962, like in Le Mans and other endurance races, and they took the step from endurance sports to Formula One, similar which did Sauber later on. Also here, the design, I mean, I really like it. Very simple aerodynamic design. The livery, yeah, great. They've just practically one sponsor. Yes, that more, but let's say it's Jägermeister orange. It's a little bit strange to consider Jägermeister with Formula One, but again, this year they decided to make this step. The car looks beautiful in orange, something which we know now more from McLaren, but here we have really the whole car in orange. And again, Jägermeister also, as yeah, Jägermeister had been already motorsports before in endurance racing. If I'm not wrong, and I may be wrong, they'd been the main sponsor on the Ford Group C car, together with Zackspeed maybe, but maybe also they worked together with Eurobrune and went together from endurance to Formula One. So yeah, I like it. Mm, and from the aesthetic point, hadn't been too successful, but let's be honest, very small team, and was nice to have them. Zackspeed, we did a special episode about Zackspeed, small German team, practically a garage team. They had they developed together with Ford an engine for Group C, and then they used this Ford engine as base for their Formula One engine. So they had been one of the few teams which had their own engine, the Zackspeed engine. Then for 89, they had the chance to get a Yamaha engine. They took the chance, which made sense because they hadn't had the budget to develop a non-turbo engine, and they didn't want to go with Ford, so they took the opportunity. And I remember uh, before the season, they had been very high hopes, not only at Zackspeed, but with German motorsport fans, because in general, Japanese car manufacturers had been very, very, very successful in the 80s. Practically the whole world feared that they would dominate completely the automotive market, destroying European, US, whatever brands, which we know didn't happen. So most people, or not most people, a lot of people had thought Yamaha, there would be something offering something similar than the Honda engine, but no, the engine was too heavy, lacking horsepower, and unfortunately, the whole season was a disaster for them. What is quite nice here to see on the photo, the sponsor. In the 80s, especially at the end, countries updated their regulations related tobacco advertising. Some completely prohibited something. Somebody gave them gray areas they could use. And for some races, I think, for example, in Hungary, their main sponsor, which was called West, a German tobacco product, looks a little with nearly the same design as Marlboro, so a little bit a Me Too product. They hadn't been allowed to put their normal name West, but they changed it to East, and this was allowed, and everybody knew about this change, and it was practically giving them more attention than if they would have started under West. Especially, you have to consider that we had the change we had the end of the Cold War. The Eastern countries grow together with Western European countries, so we like one Europe, and a lot of companies uh, went east for the markets. A lot of people traveled to Eastern countries, so going east also was quite in fashion, so good combination. Also, I mean, similar here, looks a little bit like the McLaren junior team, but also again, no comparison, no relation. But now really the last one, French RGS GH23. Oh, nice colors, nice livery, but let's say the design of the car looks a little bit out-fashioned. Anyway, welcome to RGS to Formula One. Great that they had been there, because it was great to have so many small teams, at least from my point of view. The drivers, we already mentioned Alain Prost won in the duel with Ayrton Senna. Ayrton Senna, typically in qualification, the faster driver, also in the race, the faster driver, but this causing more technical problems, sometimes accidents. And this was also a point that critics mentioned, that Ayrton Senna was very fast, but he wasn't a champion because he wasn't able um, to step back a little bit and instead of driving always at the limit. So this and Alan Prost, of course, quite the opposite. That's why he was called the professor. He knew how to handle the car, not to overdrive it, and that's why he was able to win the championship in '89 before Ayrton Senna. And we see Riccardo Patrese, who on the last race managed to become third, overtaking Nigel Mansell in the championship. There we see the drivers. Alain Prost, 34 last year for McLaren, then 90 switching to Ferrari. Ayrton Senna staying at McLaren, becoming the clear number one at McLaren Honda. Strong third position for Riccardo Patrese, who stayed a long, long, long time in Formula One. Nigel Mansell at Ferrari, Terry Boutsen, Nigel Mansell, as mentioned in the last year, the last driver to be confirmed by Enzo Ferrari before he died last year. Then Terry Boutsen at Williams, Alessandro Nannini, Benetton, Gerhard Berger only on the seventh position. Not a good year for Gerhard Berger, who would switch to McLaren next year. Nelson Piquet on the Lotus, quite successful, because even though the Lotus had quite big name, it wasn't that competitive anymore. And this was also the reason why Nelson Piquet would not stay with Lotus for 1990, because he saw Lotus with the new Lamborghini engine, you would have to develop the team from the beginning anymore, which he didn't want to do because with 37 he thought he was already quite old. Still would have some good years, but he didn't want to do all the years to develop a team, which takes various years. And then switch to Benetton, but that's another successful story. New entry, Jean Alesi for Tyrrell. First year, quite impressive 10th position, especially if you consider he did not start right from the beginning. That's practically all. The legacy, of course, 89 gets forever remembered by the rivalry between Alain Prost, Ayrton Senna, and with the famous accident the two had, as famously seen also in the Senna series. Again, so this is what we, of course, remember this season about. Even though important, of course, we had new regulations, no more turbo engines, so the first year of the natural aspired engines anymore, new area for Formula One. And that's it for the for this year, for the decade. Then we will dive into the 1990s, and no trigger warning, but the rivalry between Prost and Senna, of course, will continue, and the 1990s will get very, very exciting, and of course, tragic at some point again, as all of you know. But that's motorsport. Unfortunately, you want to say regarding the tragic accidents, but that's Formula One too, and we will have to cover all of this. With this last points, our video podcast available on YouTube, YouTube Music, and Spotify. If you're sitting in the car driving, only have audio, we are on all podcast catchers. If you're into music, have a look on Spotify, our mixtape, where we have a mix of music inspired by Formula One, some songs especially inspired by drivers. For example, we have one song dedicated to Alessandro Nannini by his sister. We have a song dedicated to Ayrton Senna also included. So have a look here and hope you like it. In general, if you like this episode, give us a like, follow us. If you have any comments, you can include it. If you also have any ideas what you want us to speak about in maybe in one special episode, you can also let us know. And with this, see you next time.